Hey, folks, welcome back to the Mike Lopez Show with your host, AC Mike. Listen, we have a special guest here today, Atlantic City guy, one of my favorite pastimes in my lifetime. One of the ways I bonded with my father, besides food and dining and whatnot, that sort of thing, was boxing. Atlantic City Boxing Hall of Fame president, founder, the guy to go to when you want to talk boxing in Atlantic City, not only Atlantic City, New Jersey, and around the world. Ray McCline, welcome to the Mike Lopez Show.
Hey, Mike, thank you for having me. I've been looking forward to this. I know we've been talking about it for a pretty long time, and I'm glad we were able to finally do this. So I'm looking forward to the interview. And congratulations on the show.
Thank you so much. We appreciate you coming. I know you've been busy the last few years with the inductees and putting that whole program together, which has grown. And we're going to talk more about that in a minute, Ray. Listen, we've been trying to get together. We've done some stuff, but you've been kind enough to bring some boxers my way, and Angela Crockett. I want to say thank you to them. Let's learn a little bit about, tell our viewers a little bit about Ray McCline.
Ray McCline, is obviously, it's a little hard to talk about yourself sometimes, but born and raised in Chicago, moved to Jersey in 1979-80, went to Oak Crest High School. Actually, I did 1 year at, I did 8th grade. I can't remember the school out in Mays Landing. I'm missing the name now. But I ended up doing my freshman year, 1980, 80 at Oak Crest High School. And then we moved to Pleasantville. So I grew up in Pleasantville in the 81 on through. And now I currently reside here in Galloway, New Jersey, with my wife and my 2 children. I'm one of those guys that, was transplanted here, but I have sand in my shoes. And I really, I'm glad the time that I've been here. I moved here right at the birth in the 80s of boxing, at its heyday in the 80s here in Atlantic City. So I was able to see boxing just thrive, and not knowing at that time that I was going to be playing a role in the future in it. But South Jersey guy with still Chicago roots. In me as well.
Gotta love it. Gotta love it. That's a great mixture. Listen, it's like you said in the 80s. I was in my teens, my late teens, and in my 20s. The greatest time for boxing and sports, let alone the casinos and what was popping here, the revitalization of Atlantic City. You had Mike Tyson, you had Arturo Gatti, you had Mickey Ward. I can go on and on with the fighters. The city was electric, besides what was happening, like I said, in the big houses. And boxing was the mecca out here. It was challenging at that point, Las Vegas, if I'm correct.
Yeah, it set the standard. At that time, Vegas was having fights, obviously in the parking garages or parking lots at Caesars. But then when Steve Wynn came here to Atlantic City, and they started doing the boxing in the ball, like in the early 80s, they were doing them in the ballrooms, in the casinos, Bally's, Sands, Playboy, Claridge. But then when they start making that transition to the bigger fights, and they start doing them inside of Boardwalk Hall, then the fights, took on a whole different, like standard, mega events that weren't able to only be done in Vegas. They were only doing them at the certain times of the year because they couldn't do them in the summer, and they couldn't do them, at certain times in the winter, when it got a little cooler. Because when you see some of the older fights in Vegas, you see the guys when they were outdoors, they had the blankets and the hats and all that stuff on when they were sitting ringside. So when Atlantic City elevated to Boardwalk Hall with Mike Tyson, it just changed everything in boxing. And then Vegas, that's when Steve Wynn went back out and they built the Mirage and a few other casinos. And then they had to start building bigger venues to be able to compete with Atlantic City. So it was reversed. So Atlantic City truly was the mecca of boxing in the 80s.
And that's it's a great history lesson. And listen, the Steve Wynn thing moving to Las Vegas is another show for another time. And we'll talk about that sometime because it still goes up my crawl. So exactly. So again, now here we are 80s, 90s. We got some of the greatest fights. Listen, I've met Mike Tyson on the boardwalk. Met Boom Boom Mancini. I could go on and on and on. I mean, you've met them all. I was just a guy riding bike, and I was like, look, here's these guys doing this here, and they're hanging out and training. Actually, in the place I'm sitting right now, the high rise, Tyson and a few of those fighters had condos in these places. So Ray, moving forward, now you're involved, you're training, you're fighting a little bit yourself, you're getting involved, and you're seeing something that's missing here. You know, we went away from it a little bit. A couple casinos closed here and there. That's in the 2010s. But in the 2000s, I don't want to say boxing talent may have declined, maybe just the majority, the number of boxers, because now we have so many different sports. I don't claim to be an expert on that. What did you see decline a little bit? Because like you just touched on, whether it was those Tuesday night fights at the Sands or Bally's, that stuff, you get a hot dog and a beer for $10 and a ticket was incredible. What do you see? And then take us to the Boxing Hall of Fame.
Well, I mean, like in the 80s, actually Atlantic City boxing predates, the 80s, as we focus on a lot, even with the Hall of Fame. We have a tendency, when our committee, we're looking at most of the fighters in the 80s and the 90s and 2000. But Atlantic City boxing actually goes back to the early, turn of the century, when you look at, fights, that were done in New Jersey and also Atlantic City. I think one of the first mob meetings, or when they had organized crime meeting, they actually did it at Walt Dream Arena, and it was around boxing. And that was in the 20s, so Atlantic City boxing actually goes back, a lot further than, what we're celebrating now. But in the 80s, I mean, like you said, the Sands, you had the Tropicana, you had Claret, you had Bally's, and all these fights were on national television, ABC, NBC, they were on, CBS. And then, you had USA Boxing, Tuesday Night Boxing Series, ESPN, fight series, and then HBO. A lot of those fights weren't actually done in the big room. They were actually done in small ballrooms, but they were nationally televised. So it seemed like they were great fights. So it seemed like they were mega fights in mega arenas, but they were actually small ballrooms. You think Boom Boom Mancini and Alexis Hardwell, that was a great, great fight, but it was actually in Bally's Ballroom. So Atlantic City was, turning, I mean, they were doing almost 100 fights a year. At one point, I think it topped out about 100 fights a year. So, I don't know if we were ever be able to go back and capture that. And I think when we start hearing people say Atlantic City boxing died or is dying, we had a very unique situation. I think I was talking to Dave Bontempo, and he said it was a perfect storm. You actually had the casinos that was just emerging. You had the football strike that was happening, and they had to fill voids, with programming, and they utilized boxing. And the casinos, and boxing, had a great, marriage at that time, and it was something that I don't think can ever be reproduced. So when I, look at where we are now, I see other places like, the Barclays Center, you have places, small, casinos, or, other casinos in other states in Oklahoma, Mississippi. So they're vying, for, boxing and other programming. So Atlantic City gets, I think got hurt a little, even with Philadelphia, with some of the casinos and other venues popping up. So I think we're going to come back. We're going to definitely bounce back. I don't think, we're going to ever, we're going to stay at the low that we've been at. But I don't think we're going to ever recapture, where we were either. I don't think that's going to happen. Even in, any place anymore, even in Vegas, they're not, they're doing the big shows, but they're not doing the small club shows like they were doing in the past. And I think Atlantic City has been doing, its share of small club shows, with the, hard-hitting promotions, the Rising Star promotions, you have Miss Downing promotions and a few other promotional companies, GH3, come in, and they've been doing shows over the years. So we're going to get back there.
So Ray, I hear you. We're going to have to cover back to this interview. We're out of time here for this segment, but I would love for you to join us again during this second season of the Mike Lopez Show with Stockton University Arts and Humanities. Ray McCline, Atlantic City Boxing Hall of Fame founder, president. We want to talk about some of these classes. So this is a hook on you to get you back again. We got to do part 2 of this.
I'm looking forward to coming to the studio to talk about it, Mike.
You got it. And listen, right here, folks, over my shoulder is a glove from one of my idols. Don't have many of them, but Roberto Duran, where I met at one of Corray's events over at Tennessee Avenue Pier Hall. Folks, stay right where you're at. We'll be right back with more.
Thank you, sir.